Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to give some book recommendations for if you love Studio Ghibli. And Studio Ghibli has actually had some of its movies be based off of books, and I specifically did not want to recommend the ones that are their source material. So for example, Kiki's Delivery Service is a book, and it's a very good adaptation, the movie, of the book, but I didn't want to just recommend the source material because that's very easily accessible. You can find that in a lot of places, and I wanted to specifically find books that maybe you haven't heard about or that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So the first book on this list is going to be one that pretty much anybody who's familiar with Studio Ghibli and read this book made these comparisons. This is the most obvious one on the list, but I thought it was worth mentioning, and that would be The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. So the setup for this story is you follow this society that is being pretty much destroyed by this sea god's wrath, and nobody knows what to do when it comes to making it so that the sea god will be satisfied, but what they think will be the solution is to find a bride, a perfect bride for the sea god, and this perfect bride is sacrificed to the sea in hopes that the sea god will become pleased and thus will stop having these catastrophic events that affect mankind. And our main character was not the chosen bride for the sea god. However, the woman that was chosen was the woman her brother loves, and she did not want that happiness to be taken from her brother and this woman, and so she goes in the woman's stead. And once she plummets into the sea, she is introduced to a world that she never really could have imagined, and then shenanigans ensue, we'll say, but a lot of really deep things, and there's a little bit of a mystery as to what's actually going on with the sea god, and maybe not everybody, you would think like, oh, people just die when they go down into the sea, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's sort of this feeling of people's spirits and people's ancestors playing a role and being able to actually see that, whereas on land, what feels like an entirely different world is more for the living, and then under the sea, it's the lines between the living and the dead are a little less divided. So I really liked this story. It was very whimsical. It was a little bit grim at times, but it was also beautiful and lush and pretty in its descriptions, and it had some really moving themes. So if you haven't checked out The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, I highly recommend it. An interesting thing about Studio Ghibli, and that I was finding to be especially true when I was making my lists, because I will be doing other parts. This is part 1. I'll do the same style video for a part 2 and at least a part 3 and maybe more in the future. But I was finding that Studio Ghibli has such a range of different kinds of stories. Some of them are sweet and adorable and cotton candy cute, and some of them are deeper and darker, and then there's the ones that are almost horror leaning and abstract. And so I wanted to find books that bring out a lot of the different sides of Studio Ghibli. So the next 2 are more dark leaning, are more horror leaning, and that would be House of Roots and Ruin, as well as Gallant. So I'm going to start with Gallant. This is one that is written by V.E. Schwab, who's a very well-known fantasy author. She's known for having these really interesting abstract plots, and that's what draws a lot of readers in. In this particular instance, you follow a young girl who was living in an orphanage who does not speak, and then one day a group of people calls and says, we're her family, we're her long-lost family, and we want to adopt her. And then when she arrives, the people that supposedly adopted her are not there, and it's someone else instead. And the house itself seems very mysterious, and you don't quite know what's going on with this house, but our main character is discovering that as she explores. And it gets to be very, very creepy. There's this feeling of, is there another dimension? Is there another reality? Is this house haunted? And that in and of itself reminds me a lot of Studio Ghibli, kind of what I was talking about with The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. Anytime that it feels as though the lines can be crossed between living and dead, or between different realities and realms, that just immediately brings Studio Ghibli vibes to mind. And in this one, it actually reminded me a little bit of The Boy and the Heron, in that in The Boy and the Heron, while our character does speak in that movie, he doesn't speak very much, and a lot of it is things that are transpiring around him, and you're more kind of experiencing his emotions and the way in which he is battling grief and trauma through this abstract Alice in Wonderland type of feel. And in this, our character doesn't speak, and you're kind of picking things apart through her reading something that came from a previous relative, her exploring this house, and abstract things happening. And so there's actually more similarities between this and Studio Ghibli than I initially thought. But then when I really reflected on it, I was like, I feel like that would be so cool. I need Studio Ghibli to adapt Gallant or something that's similar to Studio Ghibli, because I think they would do a great job with that. And then House of Roots and Ruin is one where our main character has the ability to communicate and see the dead. And there's actually another book in the series that is first chronologically, but the two, you can read them separate from one another, which means that if you do want to pick this up, if you're a fan of Studio Ghibli and haven't read this, you can start with the other book first and then read this one, but this one just happens to give me more Studio Ghibli vibes, and it's specifically because of that character having this connection with the dead. And you would think that would create something very, very frightening and scary, but in a lot of ways, the dead they're scary in that you don't know what happened to them. Sometimes you don't know why they died, but other times they're really friendly, and she talks to them like they're people and doesn't even realize she's talking to a dead person. And that's actually proving to cause a lot of problems in her everyday life, because people have certain views of her and her family based off of some things in their past. And so her sister wants to keep her locked away, so that when she goes out and about, she's out in public and she starts accidentally talking to dead people, she doesn't want people looking at them and thinking that family is cursed, there's something wrong with them. She's trying to protect her sister, but her version of protection is also in some ways trapping her. And so she, our main character, is trying to do what she can to branch out on her own, to live her own life. And she has a really big passion for painting. She is called upon by this very wealthy home to paint a portrait of their son. So she gets to know him. And the family has some, it would seem, the family that she's being employed by, it seems like they have some dark things in their past as well. And the dead maybe are actually going to help her solve what has happened. It actually gets to be pretty morbid, but I think Studio Ghibli does a really good job of, they can take things that are morbid and they can take things that are dark and they can present them in a way where you can pick up on what is going on and what they're referencing, so that it's not entirely gruesome, but that in your mind you recognize the true horror of it all. I think something like, well, it's not like this story reminds me of Grave of the Fireflies, but just pointing out that Studio Ghibli can hit those really harder things, and it can have the whimsical fun things too. Speaking of whimsical, next up we have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. If there was ever an adaptation of this and it was announced it was going to be live action, I think my first instinct would be no, because it's so unique, it's so different, it's so creative that I'm afraid if there was ever a live action adaptation, it would just look horrendous. I don't think it would do it justice. I would rather there be no adaptation at all. But if we are going to get an adaptation, I think an animated one would be fantastic, and Studio Ghibli, I think, would do an amazing job. So what I was just talking about, where they can take traumatic things and they can present them in a way where it still hits really hard, but it's not like they're trying to go for that shock value. They do that so well, and I think Laini Taylor in her writing does that really well also. So she has a very purple writing. Her purple prose is present in Strange the Dreamer, and everything is so colorful and vibrant, but it's all kind of hiding something really sinister and dark beneath. So the setup for this story is you follow a young man named Laszlo Strange, and he believes this place known as Weep is real. Everybody thinks that Weep was just this mystical city. They think it's just a story, but he is determined to find out more because he believes it is real. And he one day has an opportunity to go basically on an adventure and discover if Weep is real or not. And when he's going on this adventure is when you get introduced to another character, and her circumstances seem very odd and very strange, and you're not quite sure what led to her situation, but it seems that eventually her and Laszlo are going to cross paths. Really, truly, this is one of the most whimsical, unique, interesting, fresh stories that I've ever picked up. And oh my gosh, I just think Studio Ghibli would do such a good job adapting Strange the Dreamer. It would be so good. I need it to happen. This is simultaneously if you like this, try that, and also, hey, Studio Ghibli, can you adapt these? Which I'm not actually saying I think that they're gonna watch and be like, oh, good idea, for sure. But I just mean, I would love it if they were adapted. That would be so great. And then next up, we have an Enchantment of Ravens. So straying from the dark and getting more into the sweet. This story follows a young woman who is a painter, which I didn't realize there are some similarities between this and House of Roots and Ruin, but regardless, she's a painter, and she is asked to do a portrait of a fae man, and he talks to her, he gets to know her as she's doing this portrait, and it would seem like there's this sweet romance that might develop between the two of them. And it's cute also because he's a fae and she's a human, and you're like, aw. But when he reveals his portrait to his court, she has painted very human emotions in him that are very present and obvious in the painting. And this calls into question whether he's fit to rule, because the fae do not generally value those quote-unquote weaker emotions, and they now are trying to use this as a means to take him off of his throne, you could say. And so he brings her into the Fae land to sort of explain herself, and now she's traversing the Fae land and seeing the different courts and seeing the way in which Fae magic works and how they operate. But there are... I think Fae gets a certain image nowadays because Fae is typically associated now with fantasy romance, which is fine, but there are other versions of Fae. Some Fae are very, very wicked, and you can find stories where they're very wicked and very dark and grim and honestly sometimes kind of gross. And then there's the other side, which is more whimsical and fantastical and pretty, but maybe there's something deceitful also. And I think that's a little bit more of what's going on in an Enchantment of Ravens. So I think that the prettiness with something ugly beneath, I think Studio Ghibli does that fantastically. And if you haven't checked out an Enchantment of Ravens and you're looking for something kind of more on the sweet side, it's a standalone that I think you'd probably really enjoy. Last on the list, we have The Crane Husband. I saved this one for last just because on my main channel, I have talked about this one quite a bit ever since reading it. It is kind of magical realism, honestly. It feels a lot more like our world, with the exception of the fact that our main character's mother one day brings home what is kind of like a man, except for it's a giant crane. But she brings it home as if it's like, this is my new boyfriend, kind of. And the children in the household are very afraid of this crane. This crane seems as though it is harming their mother. It's stealing life from her. It's stealing her strength. It's zapping her of everything. And the main character doesn't really know what to do. She wants to protect her brother. She wants to protect herself. She wishes she could save her mom. She doesn't know what to do to save her mom. And the whole thing is essentially a metaphor for living within an abusive household. And our main character, I think, is somebody who represents in a lot of ways the Studio Ghibli protagonist, in that she is kind of quiet. A lot of it is observation. A lot of it is just her existing. It actually reminded me, not just because of the bird element, but it did remind me a lot of The Boy and the Heron. Not in its plot, but just in how... Well, and it's interesting because The Boy and the Heron is so bizarre, and this one's not exactly extremely bizarre, but there's just something about how the main characters navigate the world that I think is very similar to each other. And this does have some of those darker themes that I think would be executed amazingly by Studio Ghibli. And if you like Studio Ghibli and you like how they execute those themes, I think you would really like The Crane Husband. I have no problem admitting, even though I just said it's not just because of the birds, but the bird element definitely makes me think The Boy and the Heron. So yeah, why not, adapt it and you can have another bird movie. But that's it for some Studio Ghibli book recommendations. If you like Studio Ghibli, there's a good chance you might like at least one of these. And like I said, I'm going to be doing at least a part 2 and a part 3, and I have started a Studio Ghibli playlist. So my friends and I, as we watch the movies, are doing discussions, and then occasionally I might do a dedicated review, or sometimes I'll talk about them in vlogs. So anywhere where I talk about Studio Ghibli, you can find that in the playlist. But thanks so much for watching. If you have your own recommendations, feel free to leave those. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.